The BossHole Chronicles are brought to you by Real Good Ventures, a talent optimization firm helping organizations diagnose their most critical people and execution issues with world-class analytics. Make sure to check out all the resources in the show notes and be sure to follow us and share your feedback. Enjoy today's episode.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the BossHole Chronicles. I'm Sarah Best, your co-host, and I'm joined today by the ever popular, ever wonderful John F. Brower. John, my co-host, how are you, sir?
I'm good, Sarah. How are you today?
Good. I think, new year, new episodes. This is kind of a new topic today. I am very interested and very passionate about this topic, and I can't wait for you to introduce our guest in a moment. This is a person who has definitely spoken into my success in the topic for today. So without, with the mystery and everything, I'm going to pitch it over to you so you can introduce our guest, our subject matter expert.
Oh, thanks, Sarah. And yes, we're excited to have, I consider Ted to be a friend of the firm and clearly somebody that we have trusted in terms of speaking into how we have grown Real Good Ventures and our work in talent optimization. So we are very excited to welcome Ted Olson to the podcast. Ted, welcome.
Hey, so great to be here. Appreciate you having me.
Oh, it's great to have you here. So let me give everybody a little bit of Ted's background. First of all, I want to guide everybody to the show notes. You will get Ted's contact information via LinkedIn, but also a link to his book. We love the fact that we're able to highlight new publications, and his book is called Feel Good About Selling. And when you hear and learn more about Ted's perspective, you will understand why. But let me share a little bit about his background. Ted is an entrepreneur and consultant. He leverages talent optimization technology and his sales and marketing experience to help individuals and organizations develop strategic sales processes, including demand generation and messaging. And of course, all our listeners are very familiar with talent optimization and its aptitudes. Ted is the best-selling author of Feel Good About Selling, and that's pretty awesome because it just published last year, Ted. Is that right?
September 6th.
That's great. A book written to help reluctant sellers become trusted advisors. You're going to hear more about that. And for downtime, I think this is great. Ted writes, builds websites, and practices martial arts. We didn't know, Ted. I didn't know that. And that'll be his next book. And he homeschools his 4 kids with his wife, Nicole. They have 2 dogs, Oatmeal and Honeybee, and a guinea pig named Pinball. And apparently your kids wanted to make sure that was somehow included in the information that's available to the public, and I think that's awesome. But
yeah, they want the pets in the bio.
Yes, have the pets in the bio because in these days they show up on Zoom and Teams all the time, and that's what we love that. We know Ted. We've known Ted for it's been 5-6 years, and he presently is serving as the sales enablement manager and in professional services for the Predictive Index, but he's also a strategic business consultant, and that is really the origin of his book. So Ted, with all of your substantial background in sales, our work in trying to keep managers and supervisors out of the BossHole Zone, let us dig in and talk about it from a sales perspective. I think a great place to start, Ted, would be giving our listeners your perspective on something that you refer to as a power shift in the world of sales and sales management. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, there is a real power shift happening right now. So the dominant power or the dominant mindset is might is right when it comes to selling.
Right.
And that battle is always happening. It's sort of like this, those that are in power control, it's, autocratic, they dictate. But then there's always this pushback from, democracy. It's like, no, wait a minute. What about the people? Right. But don't forget the little people. And that's happening right now. So certainly fueled by the internet, right? Certainly fueled by, anyone with an internet connection can create a business. Anyone with an internet connection can disrupt and do something different and fresh and in a new way. And as this relates to sales, you still have a sales leadership mindset that is built around how do we get, push, drive? And it's like, really? Are you still thinking that way? You really thinking that's the best approach? Because you could easily flip the script. And I even wrote notes as I was thinking about it. How about give? How about engage? How about an invitation? right? The simplest way to talk to a new client is to give something, a talk, a webinar, a podcast, and then engage them. Hey, if you like that, sign up, right?
Right.
Sure.
There's not a lot of people outside of like the expert field that come in with ideas, and they give information. It's like, hey, if you want more, sign up for my seminar, right?
Yeah.
In sales, we're still like pounding. And I'm just finding that exhausting for the buyers. They're so sick of it. It's not working for them anymore. They're just sitting back waiting for when the time is right for them. That's what I mean a little bit by the power shift that is happening, but not really being seen clearly by most sales leaders.
And I think it's safe to say that is the discipline or the philosophy or methodology that you have really introduced at PI and all of the work that you are doing. It's an invitation. I love that idea that we are inviting people to come in and learn more. We're not forcing them, but we're giving that opportunity to do it themselves. And that totally changes the mindset of the buyer. I mean, I came up through sales in the steel industry, the chemical industry. I always like to think about it as a consumer. I know what I don't like in salespeople, and I love it when they ask me what's my interest, and it's like an invitation.
I think there's a short, pithy saying that I say all the time. I don't know where I got it, don't know where I heard it, but selling is helping. It's really that simple. Like if we're not really out there helping people, figure out what their strategic needs are, what the tactical problem is they need to solve, and why it matters to them, what are we doing?
Right.
Well, it's kind of a lot like a manager. Management is helping, or it should be. You talked in the beginning of our conversation today, before we jumped on the podcast, about, a really outdated mental model and how with this shift, this democratization of sales and the sales leader, that there's, it's a global shift. It's a spiritual shift. You also said it was a technological shift. Can you tell us more about that and how we have a whole new generation of buyers that are trusting their iPhones more than people in some cases?
When I look at my kids, my kids don't Google something, right? And land on some word wall SEO optimized blog to get the information. They go to their trusted reels and they go to on the Instagram and say, hey, who can teach me about this really quick, succinctly, like get to the point. I don't want to go through all of your nonsense. So that shift in the buyers is going to be a harsh wake-up call for most sales organizations. My kids grew up on iPhones and iPads. They trust that technology. They don't trust a salesperson who's coming in with any hint of pressure.
Right.
No one wants to talk to a high-pressure salesperson. Everyone wants to talk to a trusted advisor, someone who can help them think things through, someone who can help them potentially solve a problem. So a trusted advisor will always be in high demand. But how that trusted advisor now interacts with someone who's very comfortable with technology and where that relationship starts, begins, ends, we're figuring that out as we go. I think what we need to be thinking about is, hey, how do we become that trusted advisor instead of all of the salesy tactics that just continue to be perpetuated decade after decade after decade? They're like a drug, because you try it once and it actually worked. It's like, oh, that tactic worked, but you don't really know if it worked, and you don't know if another way could have worked 10 times better.
Right. Well, and isn't this where in the work, and actually when I started my consulting work, it actually had its start in sales training and sales management training, but it was all based on self-awareness and being able to be take more of a consultative approach versus a sales approach. And in reality, a consultative approach or low pressure or invitation to the client, that's always been the most successful. But it's been overshadowed by this high pressure numbers game. I remember working as a matter of fact, this is going to be in the show notes. It was our very first podcast. Don't bring him back. It was about one of my sales managers whom I said would be a great neighbor, horrible manager. And his philosophy was, just make more calls, just get in front of more people because the law of averages will be in your favor. And it's like, that is so inefficient. And I'm going to wear myself out and I'm just going to annoy a whole lot of people. Why don't we be really, really strategic about how we go after clients? And he didn't understand that. It just did not resonate. But that's still around today. I mean, that has a hold in some of our sales fields.
So speaking of, boss holes, you have sales leaders still saying the same exact thing.
Yeah.
You need to make 100 calls, 500 calls. And that's often being put on early career, just out of college, sales development reps, business development reps who aren't getting any sufficient training. They're just trying to book that meeting, and they're burning out in less than 9 months. How does that feel? What does that do to their psyche, right? How are they going to feel about being in that job? And then that's what sales is to them. It's just get the meeting, got to get the meeting. I was watching a group of SDRs calling people because the goal was to book the meeting, not to have any kind of a business conversation. Any tactics were allowed. It was like anything goes as long as you get the meeting. One guy said, I'm sick with COVID right now. I can't even talk. My voice is killing me. And the SDR said, hey, I appreciate that. I'm going to call you at a different time. He's like, hey, what if you don't have to talk? You just listen and grunt if it makes sense for us to continue. I'm like, are you kidding me? Is this where we have gotten?
Right.
And that is sales leadership.
Yeah.
That is not the SDR's fault.
Right.
That is the sales leader who is executing a strategy behind the larger leadership group of, hey, we want to push these numbers. So these investors saying, we're going to push these numbers. And you add that to the SaaS-paced world. So I have the good fortune of rolling around with brilliant people like you every single day. So I talk with world-class consultants all the time. And I'm like, these folks, they get it. They know how to sell. But I've also had SaaS experience, B2B, B2C, and channel experience. So I sort of have this holistic view of selling, which allows me to look at things like, you're only seeing this from one angle.
Right.
You don't see the larger piece of the pie, Mr. or Mrs. or non-gender sales leader. And so what you're doing is executing this activities strategy as a way of like that more activities is going to equal more sales. It might, but what if you thought about it differently? You could actually 10x your conversations, but no one's really slowing down enough to have that conversation. Meanwhile, sales managers often have 10 reports, 20. You can't lead. You can't think about sales training when you're leading that many people.
Right.
Can't be done. All you're going to do is just look at the numbers. Did you make those calls? Look at the numbers. Did you make those calls? That's about it. Maybe a few deal reviews, maybe a few pipeline reviews. Did we hit the number? How close are we to the number? That's about the extent of your management versus actually helping somebody hone their craft, come up with creative ideas to really engage and invite people into a conversation.
And that's made more complicated because a lot of times those managers were great, could have been excellent salespeople, trusted advisors versus, your run-of-the-mill salesperson, which we're going to talk about in just a second. But elevating somebody into a management role without sufficient training, maybe they're not the right choice for that, but also they're maintaining clients themselves. That happened to me. I know that when I had the top sales for the chemical company and I got promoted, I wanted to do it. I was excited about it, but they said, but we want you to hold on to these key clients. And I said, no. Two different jobs. I'm going to transition those over to other salespeople. I'll oversee it, but my job is to develop the salespeople, and that is a leap that a lot of organizations don't recognize as necessary.
It's such a hot topic. You hear it all the time. It's like, just because you were a top performer, that's not going to make you a great sales manager.
Right.
I think the question is, it depends, right? What's happening is most organizations take that top performer and think because they're a top performer, they'll be a great manager. It's a different skill set. It's a different mindset.
100%.
And there's no training for that top performer. So they're thrust into the role. Suddenly they've got all these reports who are asking them hundreds of questions, over the course of a week, hundreds. how do I write this email? How do I respond to this? What should I do on this call? How can I follow up with this person? This deal's stuck.
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, what is all this chaos? So they have no time to actually put an infrastructure in place that's scalable.
Right.
No infrastructure, let alone scalability. Like scalability is not even on the table. It's like any kind of a system. So I was interviewing a sales leader recently. I said, so what's your playbook?
Mm-hmm.
He's like, what do you mean? I said, well, how do you execute you're running a sales team? You've got 10 people reporting to you. Do they know what to do? He's like, well, it's in my head. It's like, if it's in your head, then it doesn't exist.
Right.
Right.
So if you do not have a documented process that's simple and that you can checklist, and I learned this from Jim Spertolozzi, one of the greatest sales minds probably of our time.
Mm-hmm.
And I have the good fortune of working with him and under him. And I've learned a lot from him. But one of my big takeaways was when you're working with salespeople and you want them to do something, you have to tell them. And then you have to train them. And then you have to set them free to do it. And most people aren't telling them. They aren't training them. They're just sort of setting them free.
You're right.
And of course, you're getting these wild and crazy results. Checklist Manifesto, great book to think about how you think about your sales process. Well, what happens on the introductory call? Check, 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 check. Do you have those checks listed or not? What happens during discovery? What happens during presentation? What happens during negotiation? What happens during the proposal? What happens post-sale? Is any of that documented? It's not like it's hard. It just needs to be done.
But that's a discipline that you brought to PI. I mean, that is, and you walked us through it. I know when we were at Optima last time that we started to see what was that process just to provide that roadmap. And there's some people that will gravitate to that. Others, like myself, who I'm a captain, Sarah's a persuader. We would probably say, wow, I never thought about this. And this is helpful. I'm going to have to discipline myself to do this. But you're right, setting them free. One of the things, by the way, for our listeners, check the show notes again, because Jim Spertolozzi was one of our guests. And I love one of the things he said. Sarah, I don't know if you remember, he talked about experience as a negative, because sometimes he talks about, when we're recruiting people, when you guys are recruiting people, Ted, sometimes that experience turns out to be almost like an anchor. I'd rather get them fresh because we can set them on the right path. And when we do set them free, we know that they're properly trained and equipped to go out and do good client work. So I'll put that in the show notes as well. And we will be right back.
With employee disengagement at its highest level in 9 years, your company can't afford to miss the mark when it comes to optimizing your hiring, management, and team performance practices. At its lowest level, employee turnover costs you $11,000 per person. And those are dollars you can easily save with the right set of people analytics. Real Good Ventures is a talent optimization consultancy specializing in world-class analytics specific to your people and the critical role they play within your organization. Gain confidence in your hiring practices, keep the boss holes from driving your talent away, design your teams for flawless execution, and create a culture that offers meaning and fulfillment. Real Good Ventures has a family of validated diagnostic tools specific to the human aspect of business, because we know that all business issues are people issues. Visit us today at www.realgoodventures.com and bring meaning and fulfillment back into your workplace.
Okay, let's get back to the program. Ted, let me ask you, for our business owners, senior leaders that are listening in, that are thinking about promoting or finding a sales manager, what advice would you give them to don't fall victim to the old, take your top performer or take somebody who's doing great and just plop them in there and give them responsibility? What should they be looking for today?
Yeah. So first of all, I think you can do that. Like I'm okay plucking a performer, provided, does the team support that? Mm-hmm. So my team wanted me to be the director of sales. That's how I was promoted to PI. So my team said, Ted should do it. Ted should do it. Ted's putting in processes. He's putting in systems. He's doing it right. We follow what he does.
And you're a strategist, by the way.
And I'm a strategist.
So everybody knows that. Yeah.
So, and as a strategist, for those of you who, probably most folks on this call might be familiar with PI, but if you're not, I like things done fast and right. I'm not necessarily the friendliest people guy. So you wouldn't necessarily say, oh, wow, look at this, this, because most, most people think that salespeople need to be, bubbly and persuasive,
high extroversion,
and high extroversion.
Right.
That's actually not true. What you need to be able to do is, can you help people solve their problems, right? And can you do it in a way that you're not a jerk?
Mm-hmm.
So my advice would be, don't fall into the trap of plucking your top sales leader. Make sure that, one, they want that role, because it's not the same role. Two, the team supports that decision. Three, you are going to invest in them now as a leader. And what does it mean to lead people? It's one thing to lead a sales process.
Mm-hmm.
It's a completely different thing to lead people who come in at all different levels and stages. You have much less sort of control, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that would be one. The other would be, the secret sauce that I had, because I wasn't a great leader, and I openly admit that. I'm a great idea guy.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I can put and lock down processes and resources and stuff like that. And once I realized that, I really tapped into my superpowers. The people side, I wrestled with that. But one thing I did right, I identified the ideal sales profile for the predictive index,
Mm-hmm.
and I hired to that, and I let them go, and I let them do their job. Now, did I train them on best practices? Yes.
Sure.
Did I give them a system? Yes. But I let them be who they were, and let them use their incredible interpersonal skills, their ability, like no fear, like they just pick up the phone and call,
Mm-hmm.
friendly, gregarious, open, funny. And that worked in that environment. Now, it doesn't work in every environment. So that's why it's so important to work with folks like you to say, hey, what's going to work in our environment?
Right.
So, for example, I did a top performer study. This organization wanted to clone a top performer. Like, who are the top performers in our organization? So I looked at all their behavioral assessments, used the software, and identified that, hey, it's a persuader, it's a maverick, it's a captain, it was a promoter. Those were the top profiles. But here was the interesting thing. It was all in the first sigma.
Really?
Mm.
Okay.
Yeah, I was like,
so not super wide. Okay.
Yeah. And I thought about it. I'm like, that makes sense. Six Sigma captain in there, Six Sigma maverick. After like 6 months of no movement, it's like, no, these deals take 1.5 years to close. What?
Yeah.
They're not going to have the patience for that. Organizations have no idea that this stuff happens. So let me give you the high level results. So what did an amateur sales leader like me, what was I able to accomplish? We broke the 65-year history sales record of the predictive index.
Wow.
6 times.
Wow.
So our sales team produced more revenue than the entire, any single partner that we have, and the thousands of partners that we have. We did it 6 times.
Oh my gosh.
That's what happens when you use behavioral science, talent optimization, give the right people enough structure
Mm-hmm.
and enough discipline, and let them go.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, everything you're talking about parallels exactly over to leadership in general.
Oh, yeah.
And deploying their people to do what they need to do. And I want to just highlight the fact that, Ted, you said, you created a profile. You have a job profile, a job target for success in that role. And now you hire to that and you let people go. I think that's essential. We always say people can lead from any pattern. I'm guessing that people can sell from any pattern, but what's required, and it speaks to what you said about your profile, your successful sales profile, is closer to the midpoint, which for our listeners, we just want you to know that means they're more adaptable. They can flex and bend more easily and stretch their capabilities much more easily than a person who has a stronger set of drives, a wider pattern. And I think that's significant because oftentimes when we're working with our clients and they're generating these targets for salespeople or sales leaders or any leader, there's this sense of urgency and bigness that gets built right into the target. It's 6 sigmas wide or it's 5 sigmas wide, too much. And so being very on purpose about that gives a person like you the freedom then, and hopefully it feels like freedom to let your people perform, and they are. So whatever the results are that an organization is working to achieve, isn't this a model that we could replicate over and over again?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
My bestseller, I know, my mom. She's now in her 70s.
Oh,
She has 4 decades of President's Club. She's a First Sigma, almost right up the line adapter.
wow.
Oh, no kidding.
Super flexible.
Wow.
She can read the room, adjust, adapt in real time.
That's
Yeah.
awesome. Oh
Yeah.
my,
Way to
what a
go,
great,
Mama Olson.
Yep.
great role model. Oh my gosh. Well, Ted, listen, let me, let's, this has been so great. I do want to harken back to something we talked about before we hit record, and all salespeople kind of, remember some of the good old movies, the bad sales movies. I used to do this when I did sales training. I said, let's talk about the sales movies with which we were brought up. Tommy Boy being one of them, which is funny, but one of the really dark ones was Glengarry Glen Ross. And you had mentioned that, and everybody will remember the ABCs, the always be closing, but you have a different twist on that. You have a really new and fresh way to look at that everybody needs to hear. So let's start to wrap things up with that message.
Yeah. So Tommy Boy, great movie, by the way. Great transformation of somebody who was forcing it and then finally just let go.
Right.
And then it started to flow.
Yep.
Right.
So yeah, Glengarry Glen Ross, that classic scene with Alec Baldwin of always be closing. That is a quote from a 30-year-old movie. It is not a sound sales strategy. And yet it permeates so much of sales because guess what? It fits right into that power dynamic.
Right.
Fits right into that mental model. They absolutely only coffee for closures. It becomes this just dominating toxic bravado that perpetuates the sales practices that, guess what? Your buyers hate it, and they will soon be able to do it without you.
Yes.
Right? Because technology is going to wipe you out.
Yep.
If you don't become a trusted advisor. Not in every industry, but in many. So, because people would rather deal with that. So I created a new ABCs based off of a brilliant mind in sales. His name is Brent Adamson. Check him out. He's the guy behind the early Challenger sales books. And I'm a big Challenger sale guy. I love their techniques, their methodology. However, having spent so much time in sales and having spent so much time with consultants like yourself, there's even a better way, which I write about in my book. But the new ABCs that I developed off this talk from Brent Adamson, he's essentially saying, hey, I'm not hearing any sales leaders talking about how do I help my buyer in their brain have the confidence they need to work with me, right? So in other words, it's not about me. It's not about my company. It's not about my products. It's not about my services. It's about what's going on in my buyer's head where they would decide or not to work with me. How can I help that happen? As I thought about it, I'm like, I think we can create a new ABCs of selling, which is achieve buyer confidence. If you can achieve buyer confidence in their mind, you will win the game. You will be able to help more people get to where they want to go. And I don't see a lot of people talking about that. I will quote another book if you want to get even a little more into this. It's a book called The Jolt Effect. The Jolt Effect comes from Matt Dixon and Ted McKenna. And this book is going to be the new book that changes the game. So, same way that Challenger changed the game, I think it's 15 years ago now. It's been a while. 2.5 million sales conversations to figure out what works and what doesn't.
Wow.
And the results were profound. The new enemy, I'll give you one takeaway.
Sure.
The new enemy of selling, indecision. It's not status quo.
Okay.
It's not price. It's not anything. It's like, I don't know.
Yeah.
Right? It's the omission bias. So check that out. It's worth digging into because you need to help buy. So what happens when people are indecisive? What do? We start putting pressure.
Right.
What happens when you put pressure on someone who's indecisive? Good things or bad things?
Bad things.
Exactly.
Lots of bad things. That's right.
Yeah. How bad? They've quantified it. You're 84% more likely to lose the deal when you try to push somebody who's indecisive. You're better off doing nothing. But having read that book, I actually looked back at my playbook. I'm like, I do a lot what the book already says, but I made a few tweaks. and adapted my playbook.
Mm-hmm.
So here's my takeaway for sales leaders who don't have a documented sales process. A bad playbook is better than no playbook, because at least you have something, a central source you can say, things have changed. Maybe we should move this to here, do this instead, add this, take away this. You at least have something working. You should have a workable, flexible playbook for your sales teams to execute well. If you don't have that, you're failing your team as a leader. Mm-hmm. That's not okay. That's your responsibility. It's also your responsibility to potentially turn to the people with the money behind the scenes and say, hey, everyone, we're actually thinking about this the wrong way. Let's stop talking about what we can get and start talking about what we can give in terms of value to invite people to engage with us, to have conversations. So it's not this suck the life out of you job, because it was never meant to be that way. Sales is helping people.
Right.
Let's help people.
I always got frustrated when I heard people say, well, if this doesn't work, I can always get into sales. It's like, oh my gosh, no, please don't. That's not what we want in this field. We want people who are passionate about literally, as you said, helping other people. And I think we wrap here with something that you shared with us years ago, Ted, and Sarah just used this with a prospective client the other day, because sometimes that indecision, they go quiet, radio silence. We just don't hear from them. And Sarah, would you mind just sharing with Ted what you shared with a prospective client that we learned from him?
Sure, John. I just simply conveyed, that if there was interest in moving forward, we're available. But if it's better to part as friends, we'd be fine with that too. And I think in my subject line, I said, part as friends, ?
Yeah.
And it was a prompt just to say, hey, no pressure.
Mm-hmm.
Just want to let you know we're here. Certainly plans change, when clients are anticipating opportunities. We know for sure in the last 3 years, lots of plans have changed, but we've learned not to get bunged about that and to really just be available and to occasionally ping and say, hey, how's it going? I love the idea. And then I remember having to really practice this, Ted, having been, you planted the seeds about this, you trained us about how to do this. But it's a helpful and kind gesture, and it's a sincere gesture on our part. Like, what can I do to support you? If not, it's been great working with you, and we'll see you again sometime.
Yeah, I love that. It's a great story. And most sellers think it's their job to make the decision. It's not. Yeah. It's your prospect's job. So give it to them.
Yeah.
Hey, should we work together, or should I get out of your hair?
That's exactly right.
Is it worth moving forward or not so much?
Exactly.
Is it worth the conversation, or should I get bent? Right.
Well, I wanted you to know that as long as Sarah and I have been selling and doing this work, your input, your insights have been very helpful. And that was just one example of it.
What your approach brings about is this clean, pure authenticity. And it doesn't have that, black cloud of pressure and doom over it. And to me, that's a much happier way to work and live.
No doubt.
It's so easy to be honest, because quite frankly, I don't know if I can help you.
Right.
I need to have a conversation. We assume that our products are going to save the world. It's like, one, they may not want it. Two, they may already have one. They may not have the time for it. They may not have the budget for it. They may not have the people for it. Right. I mean, there could be so many other things there that you would need to find out. So just be honest.
Well, and that reminds me of one of my favorite sayings is, when you tell the truth, you never have to remember anything.
Exactly.
So there you go. But listen,
which
everybody,
is good at our age.
Yeah, that's true. Hey, everybody, check the show notes. Get Ted's book. The link will be in there. Also, the link to our original podcast of Don't Bring Him Back. You can hear about that manager. Jim Sparadolosi's episode is in there too. But Ted, thanks so much.
I am a disciple of Jim Sparadolosi.
Yeah, he's got a lot.
You're a gem. Yeah. You're a gem unto yourself. You're a great man. Thanks for being with us today.
Yeah, great to be with you both. And if you're looking for a PI partner, 2 rock stars right here, without a doubt.
Thanks, Ted.
See you next time on the Bosshole Chronicles.
We'd like to thank our guests today on the Bosshole Chronicles. And if you have a Bosshole Chronicles story of your own, please email us at mystory@thebossholechronicles.com. Once again, mystory@thebossholechronicles.com. We'll see you again soon.